Welcome, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you into rest. Before we begin, tap like and subscribe so you'll always have a bedtime story waiting. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know. I was 12 years old when my family moved into the house on Maplewood Lane, a quiet street tucked along the edge of our small Indiana town. It was the summer of 2013, hot and heavy with the smell of cut grass. And my parents had been going on for months about how the rental we'd been in was too expensive and too far from the schools. They wanted something closer, cheaper, and as my mom put it, a real fresh start. The new house wasn't much to look at, a squat, one-story brick place with chipped green shutters and a small backyard boxed in by crooked, leaning fencing. My mom lit up when she saw the fireplace, telling us winters would finally feel cozy. My dad was just relieved at the lower rent. I remember standing in the empty living room on move-in day, staring at those blank beige walls, trying to picture what it would feel like once the boxes were gone. I was caught in that awkward in-between age. Not quite a kid, not yet a teenager. So everything felt both exciting and uncomfortable. My little brother Evan was 7 then, a wiry ball of restless energy who clung to me more than anyone else. He was shy around other kids, rarely spoke up in crowds, and mostly kept to his own little world. His world at that time revolved around Batman. He had every toy, every costume, and his crown jewel was a black plastic Batmobile that lit up and roared when you pressed the red button on its hood. He took it everywhere, even to bed. We'd only been in the Maplewood house about a week when Evan came tearing inside one afternoon. His sneakers caked with dirt, jeans streaked brown, his grin so wide it practically split his face. "Look what I found," he shouted, holding something out in his fist. My mom was in the kitchen, elbow deep in boxes of dishes. She wiped her hands on a towel and bent down. "What is it, honey?" Evan slapped it into her palm. It was a school photo, one of those laminated tags you get when your parents cough up extra money on picture day. The edges were curled and dirty, the glossy surface scraped with scratches that half obscured the boy's face. "You couldn't make out the year at all. Where'd you get this?" Mom asked. "Out back," Evan said proudly, puffing his chest. By the fence, I leaned over her shoulder for a better look. The boy in the picture had dark hair and a small, crooked smile. He couldn't have been much older than Evan. Probably some neighbor kid, Mom said lightly, setting it on the counter like it didn't matter. But then Evan's tone changed. He pointed at the photo, eyes bright and certain. "That's Buddy," I frowned. "Buddy?" "Yeah," he said, as if I was slow. "He's my friend." I met Mom's eyes. She raised her eyebrows, giving me that silent parental look that said, "Just humor him." "Oh, cool," I said carefully. "Where'd you meet him?" Evan just shrugged. "Here." Then without another word, he skipped off down the hall, humming, clutching his Batman car in the other hand. I let it slide. Kids made up imaginary friends all the time, and considering how hard it was for Evan to connect with anyone, maybe it was even good for him to invent one. Still, something about the way he'd said it lodged in my chest like a splinter. That night, sometime around 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of his voice. At first I thought it was just the usual nonsense of him talking in his sleep, but when I padded groggily down the hall and nudged open his door, I froze. Evan was sitting upright on his mattress, legs folded, whispering low and steady like someone was sitting right across from him. "Evan," I hissed, stepping inside. "Go to bed, you're gonna wake up Mom and Dad." He turned his head toward me, slow and deliberate, his eyes glassy with sleep but sharp enough to unsettle me. "I'm not talking to myself," he murmured. "I'm talking to Buddy." My skin prickled cold. I stood there a second too long, trying to come up with something to say before finally sighing. "Whatever, just keep it down." I pulled his door shut and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easy. Over the next week, things only got stranger. One morning, Mom asked me casually if I'd noticed Evan getting up at night. I told Mom about hearing Evan whispering in the night, but I brushed it off, saying maybe he was just playing with his toys. She frowned, muttered something about him acting weird lately, but we didn't push it further. A few nights later, I was lying in bed, facing my half-open door. The hallway light glowed faintly, because even at 12 I hated the dark, and I was drifting in that space between awake and asleep when the sound jolted me. The roar of Evan's Batman car engine. The familiar flashing blue lights flickered against his walls. Groaning, I pushed the covers back and got up, ready to scold him for playing so late. But when I stepped into his room, my irritation dissolved into unease. Evan was sprawled out on his mattress, deep asleep, breathing slow and steady. The toy car was across the room on the floor, its headlights pulsing, engine rumbling loudly as if someone had pressed the button. My heart thudded as I bent down, picked it up, and flicked the switch. It went silent instantly. My hands trembled a little, but I forced myself to believe it was nothing. Some glitch, maybe the button sticking. Toys broke all the time. Still, as I crept back to bed, a cold unease sat heavy in my stomach. Over the next several days, Evan became obsessed. Buddy this, buddy that. He talked about him at breakfast while brushing his teeth in the car on the way to the grocery store. Finally, I got fed up and decided to check around the neighborhood. The house to the left of ours was still vacant with a for rent sign out front. The one to the right belonged to an older couple. No kids, no visitors. So where exactly had Evan found this buddy? When I asked Dad, he just shrugged. Imaginary friend. You had one when you were little too. But the toy didn't stop. Almost every night, the Batmobile roared to life on its own. Sometimes it was Mom who got up to turn it off, sometimes Dad, sometimes me. Each time, Evan swore it wasn't him. One night, Kayla, she was 14 then, and I decided to sleep in my room together because we were too rattled to be alone. We whispered to each other, trying to calm down when the sound came again. The engine growling low, mechanical lights flashing. We froze, eyes fixed on the open doorway, and then it happened. The Batmobile rolled past the doorframe into the hallway, slowly, deliberately, without anyone touching it. Kayla screamed. I screamed too. We bolted straight into our parents' room, breathless and shaking. Dad's face twisted in anger more than fear as he stomped down the hall and flung open Evan's door. Enough with this nonsense, he shouted. You're scaring your sister. Evan sat up, rubbing his eyes, confused and sleepy. It wasn't me. Don't lie to me, Dad snapped. Evan's voice went soft. It was Buddy. The room went silent. That night, Dad grabbed the toy, ripped the batteries out, snapped the plastic apart, and hurled the pieces into the outside trash bin. We thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, it was back. Sitting neatly on Evan's dresser, whole again. Mom's voice shook as she demanded to know how he'd gotten it back. Evan just looked her in the eyes, his tone calm and certain. Buddy brought it for me. That was when Dad lost it. He smashed the car into pieces, smaller this time, shards of plastic sharp as glass. He stuffed them in a black garbage bag and hauled it to the curb himself. For a while, things seemed normal. Evan sulked about losing his toy, but my parents bought him a new Batman figurine to distract him. Slowly, he seemed to move on. Then about a week later, Mom was in the kitchen making dinner. She had the George Foreman grill set up on the counter, cooking chicken. We were all in the living room when a sudden crash shattered the calm. We ran in. The grill was halfway across the kitchen tile, lying upside down on the floor. Grease hissed where it had splattered. Mom's face went pale. I swear, she whispered, her voice trembling. It wasn't anywhere near the edge. None of us answered. For the first time, Dad looked shaken too. After that, nothing else happened, at least nothing obvious. But the air in the house never felt right again. Heavy. Watching. Evan stopped talking about Buddy, though sometimes I'd catch him staring at corners of empty rooms, his lips moving silently as if he wanted to speak but held it back. We moved out the next year. My parents never brought up the house again, and Evan never said another word about Buddy once we left. But sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I remember the dirt-stained photo he found in the backyard. The smiling boy's face frozen in glossy laminate, and I wonder if maybe Buddy wasn't imaginary at all. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, in one of those rows of brick houses that all looked like they had been stamped out of the same mold. Every yard had the same cracked sidewalk, the same narrow strip of grass, and the same leaning chain-link fence. My parents, George and Linda, had me late in life, after they'd already gone through the whole process of raising 2 kids. My sister Valerie was 12 years older, already half out of the house by the time I was in grade school. Ethan, my brother, was 10 years older, just getting his license, staying out late, and already orbiting a different world. By the time I was learning multiplication tables, they were basically grown. Valerie was in college, writing letters home about roommates and exams. Ethan was rarely around, either holed up in his room with the door locked or out driving until curfew. Being the youngest, I always felt like I had come too late, like I'd been born into a family that had already moved past the stage of being a family. My parents loved me, sure, but it wasn't the same kind of energy they had for my siblings. With me, they were older, more tired, a little gentler in some ways, but also a little distant. So I kept myself occupied. I was a quiet, dreamy kid who spent hours with sketch pads, library books stacked beside my bed, inventing little worlds to fill the silence. Most nights blurred into that same soft quiet, but one night wasn't like the others. That night carved itself into my memory. I woke up to muffled voices downstairs. At first, groggy and blinking against the dark, I thought it was Ethan sneaking in late, maybe raiding the fridge. But as I lay there listening, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I realized it wasn't just one voice. There was urgency in the tone, clipped words layered over each other like something was wrong. Sliding out of bed, I padded barefoot to my door and cracked it open. The hallway was washed in faint light from the street lamp outside, pale orange bleeding through the curtains. I held my breath and leaned out. "George, hurry." That was my mom. Her voice was sharp, higher than usual. "I'm looking for my keys," my dad snapped back, low and rough. My chest tightened. I froze at the top of the stairs, peering down through the banister. "Mom," I whispered. My voice barely carried. The voices cut off. A long second stretched. Then my mom stepped into view at the bottom of the staircase. Her face was pale, tight like she was holding something back. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "go back to bed." "We'll be home soon." I gripped the railing. "Where are you going?" She forced a smile, but it sat wrong on her face. It didn't reach her eyes. "Just go upstairs, okay? We'll be back. I promise." The tone in her voice was final, almost pleading, and it pressed me down more effectively than any explanation. I nodded, though my throat felt heavy, and stepped back into my room. Crawling under my covers, I tried to pretend it was fine. A minute later, the front door slammed. Silence swallowed the house. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, ears ringing with the emptiness. The quiet felt heavier than usual, pressing against me. Hugging my pillow, I told myself they'd be back soon. At some point I drifted, only to jolt awake again what felt like an hour later. The front door creaked open. My eyes snapped wide. Relief hit first. My parents must be back, tiptoeing not to wake me. But then came the sounds. Slow, dragging footsteps across the hardwood floor. A cabinet door groaning open. A drawer sliding shut. The faint hiss as the refrigerator door sealed closed. All the noises were normal on their own. The fridge door, the steps on the wood. But what wasn't normal was the silence. My dad always announced himself when he came home late, grumbling about work or muttering about leaving his boots by the door. Ethan, if he was raiding the kitchen, would make no effort to be quiet at all. He'd clatter bowls, laugh to himself, maybe even shout upstairs to see if I was awake. I whispered into the dark, trying to steady my voice. "It's just Ethan, he's hungry." That's it. But then the footsteps began climbing the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Each creak of the old board squeezing tighter around my chest. I held my breath as they drew closer until they stopped right outside my door. The knob turned with a soft metallic click. My bedroom door eased open, a thin crack letting in the faintest strip of light from the hall. In the darkness, I saw only a silhouette. A head, the faint outline of shoulders. Someone stood there motionless, watching. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice so small it barely left my throat. No answer. "Mom?" "Nothing." "Dad?" The shadow lingered, silent. Then, with an awful patience, the door shut again. My heart was slamming so hard against my ribs it hurt. I couldn't understand why no one had answered me. My child's brain tried to pull something logical out of it. Maybe Dad had just been checking on me quietly. Maybe Ethan was messing around trying to scare me. I clung to that idea like a rope in water. The footsteps creaked away, descending back down the stairs. Then silence stretched thick and endless. I stared at the ceiling, clutching the blanket in my fists. Finally, curiosity overpowered the fear. Against every instinct screaming to stay put, I slipped out of bed. The house was dark, the kind of black where walls vanished. Only the microwave clock in the kitchen glowed faint green, the numbers shifting over. I pressed my hand against the wall for balance and crept barefoot down the hallway. Peeking around the corner, I froze. In the middle of the kitchen stood a tall figure. Its shoulders were broad, its body still, its back slightly turned. It wasn't moving, just standing there like it was waiting. "Dad?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. The figure shifted, head turning enough for me to catch a suggestion of a face, but the shadows swallowed it before I could make it out. Then it spoke. A voice deeper than my father's, rougher, too heavy in the chest. "Go back upstairs." It wasn't just the words. It was the sound. Something was off. Wrong. As if the voice was wearing my father's tone like a mask but couldn't quite fit it. My body reacted before thought could form. I bolted, pounding up the stairs, slamming my door shut so hard the walls rattled. Diving under the covers, I lay trembling, every nerve stretched raw, waiting for the footsteps to follow. But none came. Minutes bled into what felt like hours. Then suddenly the silence shattered again. The front door slammed open. Voices rushed in with the night air, familiar voices. My mother's frantic whisper, my father's low muttering. I scrambled out of bed, my legs shaky, and hurried to the top of the stairs. "Mom!" I called down, my voice cracking. Both of them froze and looked up at me. My mom's face went pale, her mouth falling open in shock like she'd seen a ghost. I can't remember a time when my father and I ever truly connected. At best, things between us were tolerable, calm for a day or two. But there was always a weight in the air, a kind of tension that clung to everything in the house like dust that never got cleaned. It wasn't just me who felt it either, my mom carried it too. She and my dad fought almost every day, their voices cutting through the paper-thin walls of our little place in Fairview, Indiana. Fairview was the kind of quiet town where you could hear a dog barking from 2 streets over, where neighbors waved from their porches and pretended everything was fine. From the outside, we probably looked like just another struggling family, but inside those walls it was constant war. I used to ask my mom why she stayed. Sometimes I'd ask in a whisper when Dad wasn't around, sometimes in a burst of frustration after another shouting match. Her answer never changed. "He wasn't always like this," she'd say, her gaze drifting off like she was watching some invisible movie flickering across the air. Back then he was different, gentle, funny. He used to bring me flowers for no reason at all. She would tell me how they were high school sweethearts, how she had followed him to college just to stay with him. She always smiled a little when she told me that, as if she could still see that boy somewhere in the man sitting on the couch across the room with bloodshot eyes and a half-empty bottle. But I couldn't. By the time I was old enough to notice, my dad, Richard Hale, wasn't flowers and laughter anymore. He was a storm. Paranoia, rage, and alcohol all tangled together. At first, people chalked it up to the drinking. But I noticed even when he was sober, on those rare, uncomfortable days, his mind wandered into places I couldn't follow. He muttered to himself, accused my mom of plotting against him, of whispering things when he wasn't looking. Sometimes he turned his suspicion on me, narrowing his eyes and asking if I'd been spying for her. I was 9 when the word finally landed in our house: schizophrenia. I overheard my mom telling my aunt on the phone. Her voice shook, but she said, "At least now he has an excuse." Like a label could make the nights easier, the shouting quieter. But it didn't. By the time I turned 12, his apologies had all but vanished. In the beginning, after a screaming fit, sometimes he would collapse, hug me so tight it hurt, and sob into my shoulder. "I don't mean it, son. I don't mean it." But those moments faded. He stopped caring whether he hurt me or not. My older brother Matthew couldn't take it. He was 18 when he left. I was 11. He didn't announce it, didn't say goodbye to Dad. One night he just packed up, slipped out, and disappeared. I woke up to an empty bed in the room we shared, the sheets still messy, smelling like him. He never came back. Never even looked over his shoulder. That left me alone, and being alone with Dad felt like being trapped in a cage with a starving wolf. You never knew when it would lunge. I remember the day everything really started to unravel. March 14th, 2007, a month after my 12th birthday. School ended at 3:15, and like always, I stalled at my locker, shuffling the same books around in my backpack just to stretch the minutes. I hated walking home, hated what waited behind that front door. That afternoon, I dragged my sneakers against the sidewalk cracks of Pine Street, each scuff another second bought. When I finally turned the knob and stepped inside, Something felt wrong. The house was silent. Too silent. Usually I'd hear the drone of the TV, a beer bottle clinking on the table, or his voice muttering in the background. But this time, nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. I tightened my grip on my backpack strap and moved past the living room, each step quickening until I reached the safety of my room. Hours passed with me at the desk, pretending to be lost in the glow of our old desktop computer, its bulky monitor humming faintly while I clicked through random websites. At one point, hunger forced me out. I crept toward the kitchen, every floorboard creak sounding like an alarm. That's when I saw him. Dad was sitting at the dining table, perfectly still. His hands were folded together, his eyes wide but glassy, unfocused, like he was staring through the wall into some other world. I froze. Normally, if I startled him, he would snap, screaming, throwing something, a storm breaking loose. But this time, he didn't even twitch. He just sat there. Hi, Dad, I muttered, my voice thin. No response. No flicker of recognition. He just stared straight ahead. I grabbed a bag of chips from the counter, clutching it like it was survival rations, and hurried back to my room. That night, as I brushed my teeth, I heard something through the thin wall separating my room from my parents' bedroom. It wasn't the usual muffled argument, no sharp words cutting through plaster. It was sobbing. I turned off the water and pressed my ear against the cold plaster wall. The sound was faint, shaky, but unmistakable. My father was crying. I froze, toothbrush still in my hand, the taste of mint turning bitter on my tongue. I had never heard that sound come from him. Not once. It was raw, broken, almost childlike. For the first time in my life, I felt something I never thought I could feel for him. Pity. The next day at school, I barely heard a word my teacher said. His sobbing kept replaying in my head like a loop I couldn't turn off. Could this be it? A turning point? Maybe he'd finally cracked open in a way that meant change, that maybe things could actually get better. When I got home that afternoon, the house was too quiet again. I set my backpack on the floor, the thud echoing in the stillness, and headed toward the bathroom. That's when I heard it. Beep, beep, beep. Soft but steady, like a heartbeat wrapped in static. I frowned. The sound was coming from my parents' bedroom. That didn't make sense. Dad hated noise. He couldn't even stand the microwave's timer. Would slam his fist against it until it went silent. He'd smashed 2 alarm clocks before because of the beeping. If this one was going off, it meant he hadn't bothered to shut it off or couldn't. I stood in the hall, torn. Going into his room was like poking a bear in the eye. You didn't do it unless you wanted blood. But the beeping drilled into my skull over and over until I couldn't think straight. Maybe I could just slip in, turn it off, and sneak back out before he even stirred. The door was slightly ajar. I nudged it open with my fingertips. The smell hit me first, stale sweat and whiskey thick in the air. The curtains were drawn tight, drowning the room in darkness. I could barely make out a shape on the bed. A lump sprawled unevenly across the sheets. Holding my breath, I tiptoed in. The alarm clock glowed on the nightstand, angry red digits flashing as it shrieked its repetitive beep. My hands shook as I fumbled with the buttons until finally, blessed silence. Relief washed over me and I turned, ready to bolt. But then I noticed it. The silence wasn't right. It wasn't relief, it was wrong. Dad always snored when he drank. Loud guttural snores that rattled the walls. Sometimes so bad I shoved my pillow over my head just to block it out. Now there was nothing. Not a single breath. My chest tightened. Slowly, cautiously, I leaned over the bed. Dad? My voice came out in a whisper, shaky. No movement. His eyes were open. My fingers scrambled for the lamp switch, and with a soft click, the room flooded with yellow light. I'll never forget what I saw. His face was pale, slack, almost waxy. His lips had turned a sick bluish color. In his left hand, gripped so tightly the knuckles were white, was a black pistol. The sheets beneath him were soaked through, the stain dark and spreading. I stumbled back, the air tearing out of my lungs. My stomach flipped, bile clawing at my throat. A strangled gasp escaped me, but no scream. My body wouldn't let me. He was gone. I bolted to the kitchen phone, my hands clumsy, slipping on the receiver as I dialed my mom's work. My words tumbled out in gasps, so broken she couldn't understand at first. Dad's... I stuttered, choking on the word dead. Silence stretched on the line. Then her voice cracked. Call 911 now. The rest blurred. Police swarming, the coroner. Neighbors gathering outside, whispering behind hands. I remember sitting on the front steps, an officer's hand patting my back like I was some stranger's kid he didn't know how to comfort. Then Mom arrived. Her face looked ghost white, drained of every drop of color. She ran to me, pulled me into her arms, and I buried my face into her shirt. "Why now?" I sobbed. "Why? When things were getting better?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. For a long time, hatred was all I had left for him. He had abandoned us. Abandoned me. Left me with nothing but scars and memories I wanted to rip out of my skull. But as I got older, I started to see him differently. I learned about schizophrenia, about how it bends and twists reality until it becomes unbearable. I realized he hadn't just been cruel, he'd been sick. That doesn't excuse the nights he screamed at me until I thought I was worthless. It doesn't erase the fear, but it explains it. And sometimes understanding is the closest thing to forgiveness you'll ever get. Now, as I sit here writing this, my wife is 8 months pregnant with our first child. I think about my father more than I want to admit. Every time anger bubbles too close to the surface, every time paranoia whispers at the edges of my thoughts, I wonder, am I him? Is there something in me that's waiting to surface? I pray I'm not. Because if there's one thing I learned growing up under Richard Hale's roof, it's this. Mental illness doesn't just consume the person who has it. It eats away at everyone who loves them too, and I refuse to let that cycle continue. For my child's sake, I have to be better. I will be better. I will be the man my father couldn't be. I never used to think kids like me could just vanish. You'd hear whispers in the neighborhood sometimes, rumors about a runaway or a kid shuffled into foster care after things got bad at home. But those stories were always about someone else. Not me. Not the boy who used to ride his beat-up red bike down the cracked sidewalks of Brookhill or the kid who spent his lawn mowing money on Pokemon cards at the corner store. But I was wrong. I did disappear. June 22nd, 2006, exactly 3:26 a.m. And if I'm being honest, it wasn't some daring, movie-worthy escape. It was survival. I was only 11 the night I left. People like to talk about childhood like it's made of soft edges and warm memories. Birthday cakes, bedtime stories, parents who kiss you goodnight. Mine was sharp corners, slammed doors, and bruises I tried to cover with long sleeves. My mom, Laura, hadn't always been a monster. At least that's what the faded photographs seemed to suggest. Her holding me as a baby, smiling like she meant it. Snapshots people usually stick on refrigerators, but by the time I was old enough to really notice the world, she was already bitter, angry, and tired of everything. "Why can't you do anything right?" She'd snap if I spilled milk. "You're useless, just like your father." She'd hiss when I stumbled on a math problem. Her words cut deeper than the belt she reached, for when she really lost it. Dad Scott wasn't much better. He drifted between construction jobs when he felt like it and drank when he didn't. He wasn't usually the one to hit me, but he might as well have been because he never stepped in when she did. His favorite line, his excuse, was always, "She's your mom. You have to listen to her." I don't know when it first clicked that none of this was normal. Maybe it was the night I went to Josh's house for dinner and watched his mom kiss him on the forehead after he spilled grape juice. She laughed, handed him a napkin, and that was it. No screaming, no broken glass. Or maybe it was the afternoons after school when I saw kids race into their parents' arms while I dragged my feet toward the house I dreaded. I learned how to lie early. When teachers asked about the bruises, I fell off my bike. When neighbors noticed how I flinched at loud noises, I'm just jumpy, but inside I was splintering. That night I couldn't sleep. My cheap alarm clock glowed green on the nightstand. 3:26 a.m. I'd been staring at it for hours, listening to the muffled static of the TV in the living room. My cheek still stung from the slap earlier. Her voice echoed in my head, "You'll never amount to anything." And for the first time I believed her in a different way. If I stayed, she'd kill me eventually. Maybe not with her hands, but with the screaming, the beatings, the way she drained every ounce of air out of my chest. So I made a choice. I slid out of bed and grabbed my old backpack from the closet. I shoved in 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, my toothbrush, a flashlight that flickered more than it worked, and the $34.75 I'd saved from mowing lawns around the neighborhood. I glanced at my favorite book on the shelf but left it. The bag was already heavy and stories wouldn't fill my stomach. I opened my bedroom door, the hinges groaning like they wanted to rat me out. The hallway was dark, the carpet cold against my bare feet. In the living room, Mom lay sprawled on the couch, mouth open, an empty bottle at her side. Her chest rose and fell in jagged breaths. I froze, convinced she could hear my heart hammering. But she didn't stir when I slipped the front door open and stepped into the thick summer night. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to freedom. Not pure, not safe, but freedom tangled with terror. I walked until the horizon turned purple with dawn. My legs burned, and every sound, the bark of a dog, a rustle in the bushes, sent me jerking my head around. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. By sunrise, I reached the gas station on Brookhill Road. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the air smelled like old fryer oil. I pushed the glass door open, trying not to look out of place, and the cashier, a guy in his 30s with eyes like he hadn't slept in days, gave me a long look. "You're out early, kid," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I mumbled, clutching the straps of my backpack. Bought a bottle of water and a pack of crackers, watching nearly $5 disappear from my savings. Then I sat on the curb outside, eating slow, trying to look casual, like I belonged there. That's when I met her. Jasmine, maybe 16, short black hair, ripped denim jacket. She sat cross-legged on the curb, smoking a cigarette like she'd been born doing it. "You running away?" she asked like it was nothing. I stiffened. "What makes you think that?" She smirked, blew out smoke. "The backpack. The dark circles. The way you're holding yourself." I looked the same way when I left home. I didn't answer, but silence was enough for her. "Well," she said, standing and flicking her cigarette into the street, "you'll need people if you're gonna make it. Come on, I'll introduce you to my crew." That's how I ended up following her to the abandoned strip mall behind Brookhill Avenue. The place had been dead for years, windows layered with graffiti, doors sagging from their hinges. And that's where everything really began. But inside that hollowed-out strip mall, tucked deep in the shadows where the light never reached, was a group of kids who called it home. There was Marcus, 18, tall and wiry, the kind of guy who carried himself like he'd been running things his whole life. He always had a cigarette hanging off his lip, smoke curling up into his narrow face, and he'd talk big about the time he got sent to juvie for boosting cars. Whether it was true or not, we believed him, or at least pretended to. Tori was 15, tough as nails, with a glare sharp enough to cut glass. She'd run away from a stepdad who tried to hurt her, though she didn't talk much about it. She kept people at arm's length, but every now and then she'd slip me extra food when she noticed I hadn't eaten. Alex was 14, the quiet one. He carried around this broken violin case everywhere, even though there was no violin inside. He'd been on the street the longest, and he talked about music like it was something holy, like it was the only thing left in the world worth believing in. And then there was Jasmine. Jasmine, who had brought me in. She was sharp, reckless, fearless in ways that made me admire her and fear her all at once. Rule number 1. Marcus told me that first night was simple. Stick with us. You go off on your own, you won't last a week. Life on the streets wasn't anything like I'd pictured. Days bled together in a cycle of scrounging for food, begging for change, sneaking into diners to steal whatever was left on the tables. Nights were worse. Cold concrete pressed into your back, strange men circling like shadows, the constant fear of police lights sweeping you up. "Don't ever let them take you," Jasmine whispered once when we were curled under an overpass, the sound of cars rushing above us. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. "They say they're helping, but foster care group homes, it's worse than here." I nodded, even though I didn't know if I believed her. There were good days. Like the afternoon we found a whole case of soda unopened behind a convenience store. We drank until our stomachs hurt and laughed until it almost felt like we were just kids again. But those moments were rare. Mostly it was fear. Fear of hunger. Fear of being noticed by the wrong people. And that fear became real one night. Marcus had a friend, a dealer named Rico. He was in his 20s, always with music blasting the air thick with smoke. He'd let us crash at his place sometimes, but only because Marcus kept him entertained. One night, Rico handed Marcus weed on credit. "Don't worry, man," Marcus grinned, cocky as ever. "I'll take care of it." Days passed. Marcus didn't pay. He laughed about it to Jasmine once, bragging that Rico was too soft to do anything. I didn't think so. And then the night came when Rico stormed through the door while we were packing up to leave. His face was twisted with anger. "Where's my money, Marcus?" he growled. Marcus smirked, tried to shrug it off. "Relax, man. I'll get it to you." Rico's hand slid into his jacket and my stomach turned cold. "Don't play games with me," he snapped. The shouting got louder, Marcus pushing back with laughter that sounded thinner every second. Jasmine grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here," she hissed. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, and then 2 sharp pops. Gunshots. I screamed, my body collapsing against the wall. Jasmine yanked me toward the door, my legs stumbling to catch up. Rico shoved past us, a pistol still smoking in his hand, fury in his eyes. "Run!" Jasmine shouted. We bolted into the night, sneakers slapping against pavement, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might explode. When we finally stopped gasping, Marcus wasn't with us. He never caught up. We never saw him again, and no one asked what happened. After Marcus was gone, everything unraveled. Alex started wandering off on his own, disappearing for nights at a time. Tori got sick and then vanished like smoke. Jasmine tried to hold it all together to keep me close, but I could see her breaking too. That's when Eric appeared. He wasn't homeless. He just lingered, watched us from the edges. He'd bring food, sometimes hang around pretending to care, but there was something wrong about him. The way his eyes lingered too long, the way he always tried to get the girls alone. One afternoon he cornered me behind the strip mall. "You think you're too good for me?" he hissed, flipping open a switchblade. The blade gleamed inches from my stomach. My backpack slid from my shoulders. My whole body locked up, staring at the steel. And then I remembered something Jasmine had told me once, half joking but dead serious beneath it. If a creep ever grabs you, do something gross. Pee yourself. They hate that, so I did. Warmth spread down my legs. Eric's face twisted in disgust. "Jesus Christ, you're disgusting," he spat, shoving me backward. "Get out of here." I ran until my chest burned, until my throat felt like it was tearing. That night I hid under the floorboards of an abandoned house and didn't come out until the sun rose. By the time I turned 17, I was worn down to nothing. My body was thin, my clothes ragged, and I was carrying more than just hunger. I was pregnant. The father was long gone, another shadow from the streets. Fear ate me alive. Fear that my baby would come into the world already broken, already sick, already doomed. I had no money, no doctor, no idea what to do. And then a miracle. At a shelter, a woman named Mrs. Carter noticed me. She told me about a program for girls like me, a place with food beds and medical care. It sounded impossible, too good to be true. But after weeks of questions and paperwork, a couple, Linda and George, opened their home to me. For the first time in years, I slept in a real bed. Ate warm meals, saw a doctor who smiled and told me my baby was healthy. It felt like salvation, but the past doesn't release you so easily. Eric found out where I was staying. One night he showed up pounding on the door, screaming that I owed him, that he owned me. I'll never forget the look in Linda's eyes. Fear mixed with steel as she called the police. They came. Eric was arrested. I never saw him again. That spring my daughter was born. She was tiny, fragile, perfect. I named her Hope because that's what she was. My reason to keep breathing. My reason to fight. But the scars never left. I still wake up at night hearing gunshots. I still flinch when someone raises their voice. Running away didn't save me. It nearly killed me. If I could go back, I'd have told a teacher. I'd have begged for help. Because the streets don't love you. They chew you up, spit you out, and don't look back. I'm writing this for anyone who's thinking about running the way I did. It might feel like the only choice, but it's not. There are people out there who will help, you just have to reach for them. Don't make the same mistake I did. I was 11 the first time I understood that a family could splinter in ways that could never be mended. My name is Daniel Reyes. I grew up in a quiet little town just outside Norfolk, Virginia. My dad, Antonio, had been a Navy man most of his life. He served until 1993, more than a decade at sea before he finally came home for good. That's when he met my mom, Liza, a reserved woman who had grown up in the Philippines. They met while he was stationed there. He fell for her quickly. She did too, I think, and within a year they were married. Dad used to joke that he had sailed halfway across the world just to find someone patient enough to put up with him. Mom always gave a polite laugh at that joke, but it never rang loud. Hers was the kind of laugh that didn't try to fill a room. The kind that seemed to shrink back as though she was always measuring how much space she was allowed to occupy. When the Navy announced the closure of Subic Bay, Dad decided it was time to step away from service. For the first time in years, he wasn't just a name scribbled on deployment orders or a voice that crackled through a long-distance line. He was home, and when I was born, their world narrowed down to me, to building something that felt safe and stable. For a while, they managed, but I was too young to see what was eating away at Mom. She rarely spoke to her sisters except through letters that crawled their way across the ocean, taking weeks to arrive. She never admitted it out loud, but I could feel it even as a kid. She was drifting. Even when she sat next to us on the couch, she seemed only half there. Like her body stayed, but her heart never left the Philippines. When I was 6, Mom got pregnant again. My brother Matthew was born in the bitter cold of January. I remember waiting in the hospital lobby with my grandmother, Dad's mom. I was gripping my Game Boy, trying to distract myself, imagining how it would feel to finally have someone younger than me at home. When Matthew came, Mom's attachment to him was immediate, intense in a way I hadn't seen before. She adored me, sure, but with Matthew she clung to him as if her very existence depended on keeping him safe. She hardly let anyone else hold him. Even when Dad cradled him, she hovered close by, arms half extended, ready to snatch him back if his head so much as tilted wrong. "Relax, Liza," Dad would tease, smiling at her nervousness. "I raised one already, didn't I?" Her response was always the same, her voice soft but certain. "It's different this time." At first I thought she meant because Matthew was so new, so fragile. But as years passed, I began to suspect she meant something more, something she never dared put into words. Matthew's health began to falter when he was about 3 months old. It started with vomiting. At first we all brushed it off, baby spit up, right? But it didn't stop. Within weeks it grew worse. He cried endlessly, his tiny body pale, weak, unable to keep food down. One night, Mom burst into my room. Her face was frantic, her eyes wide, her voice trembling. "Danny, wake up. Get dressed. We have to go. Your brother's sick." I scrambled into my sneakers as Dad rushed past carrying Matthew, who whimpered softly in his arms. Mom kept whispering prayers in Tagalog, her words tumbling over themselves. Clutching Matthew so tightly it was as though she feared he might slip away if she loosened her grip. The hospital lights were blinding, the halls too bright for the panic in my chest. After what felt like endless tests, the doctors gave their answer: some rare gastrointestinal infection. Not unheard of, they explained, just uncommon. But to Mom, their words felt thin, like a bandage laid across something far deeper. They told us he would recover, but Mom didn't believe them. She stayed glued to his side, barely eating, barely sleeping, clutching him as though her body alone could keep him alive. And for a while it seemed like she was right. Matthew got better. Within a week he was released, and the hospital visits, the panic, even the smell of disinfectant started to fade from memory. I almost convinced myself that night had been nothing more than a bad scare, but 2 months later it came back. The vomiting, the fever, the endless screaming that filled the house until my ears buzzed. Back to the hospital. More tests, the same diagnosis. The doctors only shrugged, saying some kids had weak immune systems that he'd grow stronger with time. Dad grew restless, snapping under the uncertainty. At home he muttered about mold, bad plumbing, maybe the formula being contaminated. He tore through the house, scrubbing every corner, fixing pipes, even replacing the water filter twice. Nothing stopped it. Each relapse was the same, and each time Mom seemed to unravel further. Her face grew hollow, her eyes dark and sunken. She carried Matthew constantly. Even when tubes tethered him to machines, her body curved protectively around his. One night in the waiting room, I overheard her talking to the priest Dad had called. Her voice was ragged, barely more than a whisper. "He's going to die. God is punishing me." The third hospitalization was the turning point. Matthew had been there for nearly a week, slowly improving. The doctors were hopeful. He might even be discharged by Friday. For the first time in weeks, Dad smiled, but by Saturday morning, everything collapsed. His condition crashed overnight without explanation. Doctors swarmed the room, nurses rushing in and out. Mom refused to move, sobbing, praying in Tagalog, demanding answers no one could give. That's when I noticed a shift. Not in Matthew, but in the way the staff looked at us. at her. I sat in the hallway and saw two nurses whispering, one glancing toward Mom's room and shaking her head. Later that night, a police officer appeared at the nurses' station. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. They had begun to suspect her. It happened quickly. The next morning, officers walked into the room. A doctor asked Dad to step out, and moments later, Mom was in handcuffs. Her face was pale, her eyes wide but dry, as though she had already accepted this. "Antonio, don't let them take me," she cried, reaching for him. Dad lunged forward, fury breaking through his voice. "What the hell is this?" A cop shoved him back. "Sir, calm down. We have reason to believe your son's condition is being caused intentionally." Intentionally. I didn't even understand the word in that moment, not the way they meant it. Later I learned they believed she had been poisoning him. The weeks that followed were chaos. Bail was denied. Dad nearly lost his mind trying to fight the charges. He even appeared on the local news beside her, insisting she could never hurt Matthew. I can still see it. Dad red-faced with rage, Mom sitting unnervingly calm, almost serene, like the camera was giving her the spotlight she'd been waiting for. And then Matthew got better. His symptoms stopped after she was gone. He was discharged from the hospital but wasn't allowed back home. He stayed with my grandparents while the case dragged on. For the first time, I felt doubt bloom in me like a sickness. By the time the trial began, I was 12, old enough to sit in the back of the courtroom with Dad. One by one, the evidence stacked against her. Nurses testified. Doctors explained how Matthew's symptoms lined up perfectly with poisoning. Test results revealed consistent traces of chemicals in his system. Each time I looked at her, she wouldn't meet my eyes. She only looked at Matthew. The verdict, guilty. 25 years in prison. Dad divorced her within the year. By the time he remarried, Mom had vanished from our lives. No letters, no calls, nothing. She became a ghost. Life moved on. Matthew grew up healthy. I graduated, left home, started a family of my own. Mom was little more than a shadow in memory, until the letters began. When Matthew turned 18, she wrote to him. Then again and again. One letter every month, each one insisting she was innocent, begging him to visit. He never answered. "She's not my mom," he told me once, tossing an unopened letter into the trash. "She's just a stranger who tried to kill me." But I couldn't shake the dread. If she could fixate on him for all those years, what would stop her from shifting her gaze to me? Now I'm 34 with a wife and 2 kids I'd die to protect. And I know this much, she's getting out soon. She has no home, no money, no one else, which means her eyes will turn back to me, stretching across the years like a shadow I can't escape. And I've already made my choice. If she comes knocking, if she even thinks of stepping near my children, she'll find nothing waiting for her but locked doors and silence. Because no matter how many letters she writes, no matter how many times she swears she's innocent, someone capable of what she did will never, ever be welcome in my life again. I was never the kind of kid who thought childhood was supposed to be golden. People talked about those carefree years like they were sunshine and bike rides, but mine was a string of bruises, whispered insults, and a kind of dread that sat heavy in my stomach before my feet even touched the floor each morning. Small towns like to paint themselves as safe havens, places where neighbors look out for each other. Maybe that was true for the families with front porches on Maple Street, where dads worked steady shifts at the paper mill and moms packed lunches in clean kitchens, but not for us. I grew up in Maple Hollow, a speck of a town in northern Ohio with maybe 5,000 people. 2 stoplights that everyone ignored when the streets were empty, 1 diner that swore it had the best pancakes in the state, and a courthouse square where high school kids leaned against brick walls pretending they belonged anywhere else. It was the kind of place where a wrong move, even the smallest one, became the next day's gossip. My dad was a mechanic when he could be, but steady work slipped through his fingers. He drank too much, stumbled in late, and started mornings with slurred curses about how his boss was an idiot. My mom scrubbed houses for a living, the smell of bleach and lemon clinging to her clothes like armor. Her back was always bent from too many years bent over floors that weren't ours. We lived in a sagging rental on the edge of town, white paint peeling like sunburned skin, the lawn patchy no matter how many times Mom tried to water it. I thought I understood humiliation. Hand-me-down jeans too short at the ankles, the bus dropping me off on the poor side of town, unwrapping the same tired bologna sandwich while pretending it didn't sting. But embarrassment wasn't the same as fear. Fear was sharper, and in Maple Hollow, fear had a name: Cole Dawson. Ask anyone from town about the Dawsons and they'll suck their teeth, shake their head and mutter, "Trouble." 5 boys, each one rougher than the last, leaving dents in every corner of Maple Hollow. The older ones fought behind the gas station, took joy rides in other people's trucks, even lit fireworks in the high school gym once. Teachers dreaded seeing their names on class rosters, and parents warned their kids to cross the street if a Dawson came near. By the time I was old enough to notice, the youngest, Cole, was already stepping into their legacy. He was only a year older than me, but he seemed built from something harder, meaner. Broad shoulders, a glare that could pin you in place, and a walk that claimed every hallway. He wasn't just a bully. He was calculated. He could sniff out what hurt most: your dad skipping town, your weight, your poverty, and twist the knife until you cried. The first time Cole hit me, I was 6. I remember because my mom had packed graham crackers in my lunch, a rare treat. He walked past my desk, swiped the package, and let it fall to the floor. When I bent down, he shoved my head into the corner of the desk. The bruise didn't hurt half as much as the laughter that followed. Teachers brushed it off as boys being boys. The principal, Mr. Ramsey, told my mom, "If Ethan stands up for himself, Cole will move on." That was a lie. Cole didn't stop until something broke, and I broke often. By middle school, I had developed survival instincts. I memorized his patterns: when to take the long route to class, which bathrooms to avoid, when to eat with my head down so he wouldn't notice me. It didn't save me from the shoves or the cruel jokes about my dad's drinking or my mom's job, but invisibility gave me a thin layer of safety until 8th grade. That's when Daniel Price arrived. It was September, 3rd period math, the air thick with pencil shavings and floor wax. I was zoning out when the teacher announced we'd be introducing ourselves, even though we all knew each other. That's when a skinny kid with pale skin and glasses too big for his face stood up. His eyes, magnified by the lenses, looked almost cartoonish. His voice wavered. My name's Daniel Price. My family just moved here from Kentucky. I like drawing cartoons, and I've got an older brother, Aaron. He's in 11th grade. A pause stretched, filled with a few snickers. Cole wasn't in that class, thank God, but the awkwardness lingered. Daniel gave a small, nervous smile and sat down. Something about him clicked with me right away. Maybe it was how out of place he looked, how he seemed just as out of step with Maple Hollow as I always felt. After class, I caught up with him at the door. "You like video games?" I asked. His face lit up like I'd offered him gold. "I've never had one." We couldn't afford it. That surprised me. I thought I was the definition of poor. One rusty car, secondhand clothes, no vacations. But hearing him say that made me realize maybe there was worse. "You should come over," I told him. "I'll show you Mario Kart." His voice cracked with disbelief. "You serious?" "Yeah," I grinned. "You can even be Yoshi." He laughed, a real laugh, not the nervous kind, and for a second it felt like I'd just made the best offer he'd ever heard. That afternoon, Daniel came over. He was awkward, sure, but he was kind in a way most kids weren't. He laughed so hard at dumb jokes that tears rolled down his cheeks. And without anyone asking, he helped my mom carry the grocery bags inside. It felt strange, like the first thread of something good weaving itself into my life. My little brother Sam actually liked Daniel, which meant something. Sam usually hated everyone, a prickly little kid who didn't let people in, but with Daniel he laughed, even shared his toy cars. For a while, with Daniel around, I almost forgot Cole Dawson existed. It didn't last. About a month later, on a chilly October morning, it all came back. We were walking to first period, the halls buzzing with the scrape of lockers and chatter, when Daniel, arms stacked high with books, rounded a corner too fast. He slammed straight into Cole. Books scattered across the linoleum. Daniel toppled, and Cole's smirk spread slow and mean. "Watch it." 4 eyes. I'm sorry," Daniel stammered, scrambling on hands and knees for his books. Usually an apology was enough. Cole fed off them. But Daniel, maybe frustrated, maybe just tired of swallowing it, muttered under his breath, "Jerk." I heard it. Unfortunately, so did Cole. He froze, eyes narrowing. "What did you just say?" Daniel blinked up through his glasses, panic flickering. I said he never finished. Cole's fist cracked across his face, sending his glasses skidding across the floor. Daniel collapsed like a rag doll. Cole, stop! I shouted, but my voice cracked, weak. My body didn't move. Cole straddled him, fists and boots coming down. Once, twice, again. Daniel curled in on himself. But after the fourth kick, he stopped moving. Cole snorted, spat near his head, and walked off like it was nothing. For a heartbeat, I couldn't move. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning everything. Then I dropped to my knees beside Daniel. Daniel, hey, wake up. Please wake up. He didn't. His lips parted, eyes half closed, a thin trickle of blood sliding from his nose. Panic surged. My scream tore through the hallway. Teachers came running, voices sharp echoing off lockers. Call 911, someone shouted. Sirens in the distance blurred into the chaos. Hands pressed on Daniel, teachers kneeling, kids staring wide-eyed. When they asked me what happened, I lied. I just found him like this. My words felt like ash in my mouth. But Cole was still out there, walking these halls. The next day, Daniel's desk sat empty. Whispers filled every corner. By Friday, the rumors had split into two camps. Some said he was in a coma, others whispered he hadn't made it. I wanted to know the truth, but the Prices didn't have a phone. That afternoon, I rode past their rented house. The blinds were drawn tight. Through a gap, I caught the shadow of someone pacing. On the porch stood Aaron Price, 17, built like he belonged on a football field, his face carved in anger. And up the street, smirking like nothing had changed, came Cole Dawson. My stomach dropped. Aaron stormed down the steps. Dawson. Cole stopped, squinting. What do you want? You killed him, Aaron barked, shoving him hard in the chest. Daniel's dead because of you, you piece of garbage. The words hit me like ice water. Dead. Daniel was gone. For once, Cole's smirk faltered. His eyes darted around, searching for an audience. Back off. You think you can beat on people forever? Aaron's voice cracked with fury. You think you can walk away from this? The street went silent. Neighbors peeked from porches, kids froze on bikes. The air felt too heavy to breathe. Then Aaron reached into his waistband. Gasps rippled. My chest seized. No, wait, Cole started, but the cracks of gunfire split the morning. Cole dropped instantly, blood pooling dark on the pavement. Screams erupted. Kids scattered, adults shouted. My bike wobbled beneath me, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Aaron didn't run. He slid the pistol back into his jeans, calm as if he'd only closed a door, and walked back toward his porch. The cops swarmed Maple Hollow within the hour. Sirens, flashing lights, shouting. Aaron locked himself inside while his mother screamed from the yard, begging him to come out. His father cursed the police. Negotiators called through megaphones. By nightfall, SWAT went in. They found Aaron slumped in his bedroom. He'd turned the gun on himself hours earlier. News spread before dawn. By morning, the whole town knew. 3 lives gone in 2 days. The Dawsons threatened lawsuits, but there was nothing to take. The Prices slipped back to Kentucky within weeks. Their house stood empty for years, a rotting monument to what had happened. At school, nothing changed. No counselors, no assemblies, no one telling us it was okay to grieve. Monday morning, we were expected to sit at our desks like the halls weren't stained with ghosts. But I never forgot. People talk about bullying now like it's serious. Anti-bullying programs, zero-tolerance rules, counselors ready to step in. Some roll their eyes and call it overblown. I don't, because I know what happens when no one listens. 3 boys died in Maple Hollow. Daniel, Aaron, even Cole. All gone because adults shrugged and said, boys will be boys. And me, I carried the weight of silence. I never told anyone I saw it all. I never admitted I could have spoken up. I was too afraid. Maybe I still am. But I tell this now because silence rots you from the inside. Because if someone had noticed Daniel's bruises, or listened to the tremor in Aaron's voice, or looked past Cole's cruelty and seen the pain underneath, maybe things would have ended differently. Instead, Maple Hollow will always bear the stain of that October, and I'll always carry Daniel's laughter echoing in my room, tears rolling down his face over some dumb joke, before everything fell apart. I grew up in a quiet but rough neighborhood on the outskirts of a small Midwestern town called Maplewood. When I say quiet, I don't mean peaceful or safe. It was the kind of quiet where people minded their own business, locked their doors before the sun went down, and whispered rumors about each other but rarely ever stepped in when something was wrong. My family didn't have much. We lived with my paternal grandparents on their modest plot of land, in a faded white house with peeling paint and a wide front yard where I spent most of my childhood. At the time this story happened, I was only 5 years old, too young to understand just how dangerous the world could be, but old enough to remember shadows of things I wish I didn't. Some details blur at the edges now, but the memory itself is carved into me like a scar. My dad, Richard, worked 2 jobs back then. During the day, he was a mechanic at the local auto shop, his hands always stained with grease. At night, he hauled lumber for a friend, his body worn down but determined to provide. My mom, Elena, stayed busy helping my grandmother with endless chores, laundry, cooking, errands for the family, since she didn't yet have steady work of her own. That meant I spent long hours in the yard, usually under the loose watch of my grandparents' Rottweiler, Brutus. Brutus wasn't the kind of dog you found in picture books with smiling kids. He was huge, blocky head, cropped ears, and a muscular build that made strangers hesitate at the front gate. But to me, he was just Brutus. The dog who let me tug on his droopy jowls, who'd let me rest my head on his side when I got tired of playing, and who stole cookies right out of my hand if I wasn't paying attention. Most of the time he was lazy, content to sprawl under the oak tree. But he was protective, fiercely so. My grandfather always said, "That dog knows his people. He'd die before he let anyone hurt you." I never thought too much about it. To me, Brutus was just a big, goofy shadow that followed me around. It was a warm, late summer afternoon, the kind where the air carried the sharp tang of cut grass and the faint gasoline smell of someone mowing a few houses down. I sat in the yard, hunched over a plastic dump truck, pushing it through patches of dirt, making soft engine noises under my breath. Brutus was stretched out in the shade of the old oak tree, eyes half closed but ears still flicking at every sound. Inside, my mom was folding laundry and my dad was on the phone, probably talking to one of his bosses. From the kitchen window drifted my grandmother's radio, humming an old country tune I barely recognized. That's when I saw the car. It rolled slowly down the street, a beige sedan, nothing special, the kind of car you wouldn't remember even if you saw it twice. At 5 years old, cars passed all the time and I hardly noticed. But this one didn't keep going. It stopped, right in front of our gate. The driver leaned across the passenger seat and rolled the window down. He looked ordinary, forgettable even, mid-30s, thinning brown hair, glasses that flashed in the sunlight, a face so average you'd lose it in a crowd. He gave me a smile that didn't quite fit. His lips curved up but his eyes stayed flat. "Hey there, kiddo," he called, voice too cheerful, too smooth, like he'd rehearsed it. "What are you playing with?" I froze. I wasn't used to strangers talking to me. My parents had drilled politeness into me though, so I lifted the dump truck a little and said, barely above a whisper, "Truck." "That's a nice one," he replied, nodding. "You like toys, huh?" I nodded again. Brutus stirred then. His head lifted from the dirt, ears pricking, eyes narrowing at the car. He didn't move, but I could feel his focus sharpen. The man leaned a little farther out the window, his voice dropping almost conspiratorial. "Tell you what, I've got something even better for you. You want a toy? I got one right here." From the passenger seat, he grabbed a stuffed animal, a lion, golden fur, little button eyes, stitched smile. My 5-year-old heart leapt at the sight of it. I loved animals, and I didn't own many stuffed toys. "You want it?" he asked, holding it out through the open window. "Yes, please," I whispered, stepping closer to the gate without thinking. That was when Brutus moved. A low growl rumbled from his chest, so deep it vibrated through the air. He rose from beneath the oak tree like a shadow, tearing itself free from the ground. His lips curled back, teeth bared, eyes locked on the man. The sound of him was primal, something that made the fine hairs on my arms stand straight up. The man's smile faltered. "Hey now, are that dog friendly?" Brutus barked, sharp and loud, his body rigid as he planted himself between me and the fence. His eyes never left the man, and for the first time that afternoon I realized the world outside my yard wasn't as safe as I'd thought. I didn't understand why Brutus was acting so upset. I looked at the man, then at Brutus, then back again, confused. "It's okay. I said softly, with the kind of innocence only a 5-year-old could have. He's just grumpy sometimes. Without a second thought, I slipped my hand through the gate and took the stuffed lion from the man's hand. "Thank you," I said, my smile wide. The man gave a short, awkward laugh, his words coming out too quick, too forced. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You enjoy that, okay?" He glanced around the street like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. Then he shifted the car into drive and pulled away slowly, his smile fading as Brutus erupted into another round of barks, louder this time, sharper. The dog chased the car along the inside of the fence, every muscle rigid, his deep growl rattling through the yard until the beige sedan disappeared down the street. Still clutching the lion, I walked inside, proud and beaming. My dad noticed instantly. He was standing near the doorway, phone still in hand, but his eyes went straight to the toy in my arms, his brow furrowed. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, his voice already tight. "A nice man gave it to me," I said proudly, hugging the toy against my chest. The change in my dad's face was instant. His eyes hardened, his jaw clenched, and before I could say another word, he bolted for the front door. I ran to the window and peeked out just in time to see him sprint into the yard, fists balled like he was ready to swing at the air itself. His head whipped left and right, scanning the street, but the beige car was already gone. When he came back inside, his voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Elena, someone just tried talking to her at the gate. Some son of a bitch gave her a toy." My mom's face drained of color. She rushed over, pulled me into her arms, and pried the stuffed lion away from me. Her hands shook as she held me close. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't talk to people you don't know. Do you understand me? Strangers are not your friends. Even if they give you something nice, you never go near them." But he was nice," I said, lip trembling. "He gave me Simba." "You don't know that," Dad snapped, his voice sharp as a knife. "Nice doesn't mean safe." I started crying then, not because I understood what he meant, but because I hated being yelled at. I didn't care about the man in the car. I just wanted to keep my toy. After some heated back and forth, Mom finally washed the stuffed lion in the sink, inspecting it carefully like she expected poison to drip from its seams. Eventually, she let me keep it, though she never looked comfortable seeing me play with it again. As I grew older, the memory came back in pieces. Sometimes I remembered that strange smile, the way it never touched his eyes. Other times, the way his head turned left and right before he drove away. It wasn't until I was a teenager that the full weight of it sank in. That man wasn't just being nice. He had pulled up to a house that wasn't his, singled out a child he didn't know, and tried to lure her closer with a gift. If Brutus hadn't been there, if he hadn't growled, hadn't made his presence known, I don't know how that day would have ended. Years later, I asked my parents about it. The way they looked at me was telling. Uneasy, guilty, like the memory haunted them too. "I should have gotten the plate number," Dad muttered, shaking his head. "Should have gone after him. God knows how many kids he tried that with." Mom just shook her head slowly, her voice quieter. "All I cared about was that you were safe. That dog Brutus. He saved you?" "Brutus passed away when I was 9. Old age, nothing dramatic. But I never forgot the day he stood between me and something I couldn't yet understand. I still have that stuffed lion. Its golden fur is worn thin. Its seams frayed from years of being hugged to sleep. It sits in a box in my closet now. But every time I see it, I think about how close I came to becoming a name on a missing child flyer. And I think about Brutus, the lazy, goofy Rottweiler who became a wall of teeth and muscle when it mattered most. One day, when I have my own home and finally get a dog, I already know what I'll name him. Brutus. Because I'll never forget who protected me when no one else was watching. I'm 21 now, living in a small apartment in the city, miles away from any woods. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when I catch my reflection in a darkened window, that old weight presses down on my chest. The thought claws its way back into my head. What if he's still out there? What if he remembers me? And sometimes, when the world is too still, I swear I hear it again. Tap, tap, tap. I used to think memories were like photographs, crisp, permanent, something you could hold up to the light and know it would always look the same. But they're not. I've learned that the mind isn't a photo album. It edits, hides, distorts. It can bury something so deep you start to believe it never happened at all. For as long as I can remember, I believed my mother died in a car accident when I was just a toddler. That was the story my grandparents told me, and I had no reason to doubt them. They were steady, dependable people, always making sure I had food on the table, notebooks for school, a bed with clean sheets. They gave me stability, but even then I sensed cracks in the story they built around me. The nightmares began when I was 7. They weren't the usual bad dreams a kid might have. Some nights I would wake up screaming, fists tangled in my blanket like it was the only thing protecting me. There was always blood in those dreams, always screams, always the sound of something heavy, connecting over and over with sickening force. I didn't understand it. Couldn't place it. It felt too real to be random, but I couldn't explain it. Each time my grandparents would rush into my room, my grandmother would sit on the edge of my bed, hands trembling as she stroked my hair back from my sweaty forehead. "It's just a dream, Daniel. Just a dream," she'd whisper over and over, her voice thin but gentle. But my eyes always drifted past her to the doorway where my grandfather stood silently, his shoulders rigid. He never said a word, just watched, jaw locked tight, as if he knew something I didn't. As I grew older, the nightmares became less frequent, fading into the background like scars under clothing. When they did come, though, I'd jolt awake drenched in sweat, my chest heaving like I had survived something instead of dreamed it. By high school, I had convinced myself they meant nothing, that I was just a kid with too much imagination and too many horror movies rattling around in my brain. I might have carried that lie with me forever if it weren't for therapy. Years later, sitting in a softly lit office with the sound of a pen tapping against a notepad, pieces of truth began to surface. My parents, Eric and Melissa Turner, weren't the tragic young lovers I had sometimes imagined them to be. They'd grown up in Crestwood, Ohio, a gray industrial town where the factories never stopped coughing smoke into the sky. Most kids there either hardened early or crumbled fast. Both of my parents dropped out of high school, and by the time I was born, meth had already consumed them. After everything fell apart, my grandparents, Thomas and Eleanor Green, my mother's parents, stepped in. Strict but kind, deeply religious, they did their best to rebuild me, brick by brick, while trying to demolish what little my parents had left behind. I couldn't blame them for hiding the truth. They thought they were protecting me. Maybe in their own way they were. But when I turned 25 and sat across from Dr. Murphy, I felt the pull to start digging anyway. "Therapy?" I asked him once, trying to laugh it off. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with that unreadable expression of his. "Daniel, you've told me about the nightmares. The ones you had as a child. You said they were vivid." "Yeah," I muttered, peeling the damp label off the water bottle in my hands. "Always the same thing, blood, screaming, something breaking. Over and over." He tilted his head, eyes sharp but calm. "Do you believe they mean something?" I gave a dry laugh. "I used to. Now? I think it was just too many late-night horror flicks messing with my head." "Perhaps," he said quietly. He paused, tapping his pen once more. "But sometimes recurring nightmares are not random. They can come from repressed memory. Have you ever considered hypnosis?" The word made me snort. "Hypnosis? What, like stage shows where someone makes you bark like a dog?" He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Not at all. Clinical hypnosis isn't mind control. It's a relaxation technique, helping the mind drift just deep enough to allow suppressed memories to surface. Nothing will come out that isn't already in you." I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to cling to the disbelief. But something in me stirred, curiosity, maybe fear. Against my better judgment, I agreed. That first session felt like sinking into water, hovering somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. Dr. Murphy's voice was low, steady, a rope guiding me down. He told me to focus on colors, sounds, smells from my childhood. "Where are you, Daniel?" he asked softly. My throat tightened. My palms grew damp. I swallowed hard before answering. "Home?" I whispered under hypnosis, my voice thin, unsteady. Dr. Murphy's calm tone cut through the haze. "Who's home, Daniel?" "My parents," I breathed. "Tell me what you see." At first it was vague, just fragments. A haze of cigarette smoke, the sticky feel of matted carpet fibers pressing against my small palms. A lamp flickering with a weak, sickly light. Then the blur sharpened, and there she was, my mother, Melissa. She was crying. her face swollen, streaked with purple bruises. Her wrist bound to something cold and metallic. Her eyes were wide, terrified, locked on me even though I was so small. Then came him. My father, Eric, a shadow more than a man, his voice booming, full of rage. And in his hand, a hammer. It rose. It fell, rose, fell, again. The sound of it cracked through me and I screamed. My body jerked violently in the chair, thrashing until Dr. Murphy's voice cut in. Urgent. Pulling me back. My eyes flew open, the ceiling spinning above me as I gulped for air. My shirt clung to my skin, soaked in sweat. "That's not real," I choked out, shaking, my voice barely a whisper. "It can't be." But deep down I knew it was. I couldn't leave it there. I needed proof. Something outside of my own head to tell me if what I saw was just a nightmare, or if it was my childhood breaking through the cracks. Through some college friends, guys with sketchy but useful internet skills, I got access to old police records from Crestwood. The date was burned into me the moment I saw it, December 31st, 1999. The incident report was clinical, detached, but the words hit like blows. Upon arrival at 11:52 p.m., responding officers found the body of Melissa Turner handcuffed to a radiator in the living room. Multiple blunt force trauma injuries consistent with a framing hammer were observed. The suspect, identified as Eric Turner, was later discovered deceased in the master bedroom with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The couple's 3-year-old son, Daniel Turner, was found unharmed, but covered in blood belonging to the victim. Child transported to Crestwood General Hospital for evaluation. I had to stop reading, the letters swimming. My hands trembled so badly the papers rattled. Tears blurred everything until it was just black ink and white paper bleeding together. It hadn't been just a dream. I had been there. That night I sat across from my grandparents at the dinner table. The meatloaf on my plate sat untouched, growing cold. I stared at it, my voice raw when it finally came out. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The sound of my grandmother's fork hitting porcelain was sharp, startling. Her eyes filled immediately, tears slipping down her cheeks. My grandfather kept his gaze fixed on his plate, silent. "Daniel," my grandmother whispered. Her voice cracked. "We thought it was better this way. You were so little. You didn't need those memories haunting you." My throat burned. "I had them anyway," I snapped. My hands shook against the table. All those years I thought I was losing my mind. My grandfather finally looked up. His face was pale, worn down, but his eyes met mine with a kind of tired resolve. "What good would it have done, son? Your parents, they weren't fit to raise you. We wanted you to have a chance at a normal life, so we told you she died in a car accident. We thought we'd buried it deep enough." The chair scraped hard against the floor as I shoved back, standing. "You should have trusted me with the truth." My voice broke. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything. It's been years since that night, and I've tried to make peace with it, or as close to peace as anyone can. I don't think of my parents as people anymore. To me, they're a story, a cautionary tale of what happens when addiction and rage consume everything. I'm 30 now. I've got a decent job, a small apartment, and friends who know nothing about the nightmares I used to have. Most nights I sleep fine. But every now and then, when the wind rattles the pipes or footsteps echo too loudly in the apartment above me, I wake up with his voice still ringing in my ears. I hear the hammer. I hear the impact. Again and again. And in those moments I remember him. That terrified little boy standing barefoot on a sticky carpet, tiny footprints smeared red across the floor. I know that boy was me, but sometimes it feels like he belonged to someone else entirely. Because on that night in Crestwood when my father killed my mother and then himself, that was the night I stopped being a child. It was the night I became someone else. I was 10 years old when my family moved to Ridgefield, Ohio, a quiet little town that looked perfect if you didn't look too close. My parents always said they wanted somewhere safer than the city we used to live in, some place where they didn't have to worry every time I walked down the street. Ridgefield checked every box. Low crime, good schools, tree-lined streets with kids riding bikes until the sun went down. To them it was the American dream. To me it just felt like starting over. We moved into a modest white two-story house on Pine Hollow Drive, right at the bend where the road curved sharply, and the trees seemed to lean in heavy from both sides like they were listening. My dad was instantly proud of the yard, even though it was mostly dirt and patchy weeds when we arrived. He stood with his hands on his hips like a general looking over his troops and said, "Give me one season and this'll be the best lawn on the block." That first evening, I stood on the porch staring down the road. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and the faint smoky burn of someone's barbecue. It should have felt comforting, but the silence made my chest tighten. Back where we used to live, there was always noise, cars, sirens, voices bleeding in from the street. Here the quiet pressed down heavy like a blanket I couldn't kick off. The next morning was my first day at Ridgefield Elementary. 5th grade, new school, new faces. My stomach knotted as soon as I stepped into the cafeteria. Ridgefield had this rule where everyone sat with their own class at lunch. I ended up at a table full of strangers. Nobody was outright cruel, but nobody included me either. They whispered, exchanged glances, and their conversations felt like a fence with no gate. I ate quickly, eyes on the clock, willing recess to come faster. That week fell into a routine. I'd come home, dump my backpack in the hallway, grab my bike, and ride endless loops around Pine Hollow Drive. Something about circling the block calmed me, even when my legs ached and my lungs burned. That's how I met Eli. He was about my age, though he went to some private school in town. I first saw him tossing a football in his yard. He waved me over. "You the new kid in the White House?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm Ryan. I'm Eli. You want to throw?" From then on, afternoons didn't feel so lonely. We'd ride bikes, toss the football, trade jokes. He was easy to be around. For the first time that week, I felt a little less like an outsider. Then came Caleb. I met him on a Saturday evening. The doorbell rang and my mom called up the stairs. "Ryan, there's a boy here asking for you." Confused, I came down and found a kid on our porch. He stood awkwardly, messy blonde hair falling in his eyes, sneakers scuffed and dirt-stained. He had this half-smile that didn't sit right on his face. "You just move in, right?" he asked. "Yeah. I'm Caleb. I live down the block." He hesitated, rocking on his heels. "You like video games?" "Yeah, I got San Andreas." "You want to play?" I didn't own that game. My parents would have never allowed it, but I wanted it badly. So I said yes. Caleb's house was at the far end of the block. From outside, it stood out in the worst way. While every other lawn was green and neat, his was just dirt and stubborn weeds. The paint peeled in strips and the screen door rattled against its frame when the wind hit it. Inside was worse. The air smelled sour like spoiled food and damp laundry. Boxes and junk cluttered the corners, and a tower of old newspapers leaned dangerously against the wall. Caleb didn't mention any of it. He just led me straight to the basement. The basement reeked of mildew and something sharper, like ammonia. A single lamp cast weak yellow light over piles of clutter. In the middle sat an old brown couch facing a TV hooked to a PS2. "Sit," Caleb said, already grabbing the controller. We played. For a while I forgot the smell, forgot the house. We laughed, crashing cars and running from cops in the game. Nearly 2 hours slipped by before I said I needed to go. "Already?" His voice came out sharp, almost desperate. His face felt like I'd betrayed him. "Yeah, my mom's probably waiting." He walked me halfway down the block, trailing behind me silently. When I finally turned and said, "All right, see you later," he just stood there watching me walk away. That night, lying in bed, I kept replaying it in my head. The sour air, his too quick smile, the way his eyes clung to me as I left. Something about Caleb lingered and I couldn't shake it. Something about Caleb unsettled me. It wasn't just his rundown house, it was the way he looked at me. Like he wasn't simply glad I came over, but that he needed me in some desperate, unspoken way. The next day, he showed up again. He rang the doorbell, and before I could get downstairs, my mom had already let him in. We ended up in my room playing GameCube, but he sat too close. No matter how I shifted, he leaned back in, his knee pressing against mine, his shoulder brushing me. My chest tightened with the urge to tell him to back off, but I didn't. I just kept playing, pretending not to notice. That evening, I finally told my mom, "I don't really like that kid. He's weird." She gave me a look. "Ryan, you just moved here. Don't be so quick to judge people. He probably just wants a friend." But Caleb didn't take hints. The following day, I begged my mom to tell him I wasn't feeling well when he came by. She did. Later that afternoon, I biked up to Eli's house instead, and we decided to ride around together. As we pedaled past Caleb's place, the front door creaked open. He stepped outside, still watchful, like he'd been waiting for me. "That kid's weird," I whispered to Eli. Eli's eyes widened. "You went inside his house?" "Dude, everyone knows that family's messed up. He's like a year or two older than us, but something's off about him." After that, I tried avoiding Caleb, but he didn't make it easy. The first real scare came one night in September. The air was cool and I'd gone to bed with my window shut tight. Sometime in the night, I woke up shivering. My window was wide open. The curtain swayed inward with the breeze. Before I could even sit up, something poked my foot. I screamed. At the foot of my bed, crouched low in the shadows, was Caleb. "Shh," he hissed. "It's just me. What are you? Get out." My voice cracked, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. He crawled closer. "My parents are fighting. I just wanted to sleep here." "No, get out." I shoved at him, panic rushing through me. He hesitated, then turned and crawled back out through the window. Watching his shadow disappear into the night was the most disturbing sight I'd ever seen. I slammed the window shut, locked it, and bolted to my parents' room. When I told them what happened, they looked stunned. My dad pulled on his robe, stormed down the block, and pounded on Caleb's door. He came back half an hour later, jaw tight, muttering, "His mom's insane." She laughed in my face. They didn't call the police, maybe because Caleb was just a kid. But a few nights later, it happened again. Knocking at my window. Soft at first, then harder. The blinds rattled. I stayed frozen in bed, whispering, "Go away." The knocking dragged on for what felt like forever. 5 minutes, maybe more. At one point, I heard the latch jiggle. My body was stiff with fear. Finally, it stopped. When I told my parents, they just sighed. "Ignore him. He'll get bored." But Caleb didn't get bored. A week later, I was riding with Eli and another new friend, Marcus, when we passed Caleb's house. He was standing at the window, staring out, eyes locked on me. My stomach flipped. That night, it escalated. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My window broke inward, blinds clattering to the floor. Caleb climbed through, his face pale in the moonlight. I screamed and bolted down the hall to my parents' room. My dad shot out of bed, charging outside barefoot. By the time he reached Caleb's, the kid had slipped back inside. My dad pounded on the door until Caleb's parents finally answered. From my room, I could hear muffled shouting, my dad's fury spilling out into the night. When he came back, he was shaking with anger. "They'll pay for the window," he said through clenched teeth. "If they don't, I'm calling the cops." They did pay. And after that night, Caleb never came back. For months, I lived in fear that he would. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside made me jump. Sometimes, when we drove past his house, I'd see him standing on the porch just watching. 2 years later, the house was empty. His family had moved away. No one knew where. Even now, thinking back, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't screamed that night. What if I'd frozen, or worse, let him stay? He wasn't just lonely, there was something darker in him. I still dream about it sometimes. The breeze on my face, the curtain blowing inward, and Caleb's shadow crouched at the end of my bed. And I wonder what kind of person he grew into. Because kids like that don't just disappear.